Anyways, okay, let's get into some climate change news. I know it's late in the day. I'm sorry we went way long on that. But this is from today. This is from Brad Johnson, otherwise known as @ClimateBrad. I don't know. Maybe I should change my Twitter handle to Climate Bear or something. Because everybody, all the cool climate guys have like Climate Pete, Climate Ben, Climate Brad. Um, Maybe I'll change my Twitter handle to Climate Change. Maybe I'll change my Twitter handle to Consume More Climate. Um, Only 20 degrees Celsius above normal in much of Antarctica right now. And yeah, that's wild. So there you go. 20 degrees Celsius above normal, which are anomalies that we see in the Arctic quite often, but that now moving down to Antarctica. Somebody says only 20. That's not good. We need to get those numbers up. Let's hit 30 or 40. Obviously, a lot of snark going on there. And this is from, well, Climate Ben C. Are there any journalists out there willing to tell everyone that scientists now know global warming will soon hit levels shown by the IPCC to be severe enough for most climate tipping points to be crossed, or are they all planning to save that up for a catastrophically rainy day? Right. I mean, this is actually a brilliant tweet. We're you know we're way down the rapids in the river. We're in a dangerous part of the rapids, right? And it's going to be very hard to get to the shore until before we go over the falls. That's where we're at. But a lot of journalists out there, a lot of media types and hypes are and I'd say some of the scientists too are not willing to tell people, guys, we really, this is happening and it's quite bad. But let's go on to this article that he posts. The article that he posts is from The Conversation. This is quite old. December 9, 2015, but what's old is new again. What climate tipping points are and how they could suddenly change our planet. As recently as 6,000 years ago, the Sahara was green and fertile. We found evidence of large rivers crossing the region, lined by flourishing settlements. Then suddenly things changed. Trees died and land dried up. Soil blew away or turned into sand, and those rivers were no more. In just a few centuries, the Sahara was transformed from a region similar to modern South Africa into the desert we know today. This is an example of a tipping point. Just think of the climate like a chair. It takes a strong push to tip over a chair stood on 4 legs, but when it's leaning on only 2 legs, the required push becomes smaller. Indeed, if the inclination becomes large enough, it will tip over by itself. Today, climate change inclination is increasing, and we know it could suddenly tip over, as our planet has previously witnessed several abrupt switches between different states. Along with what happened to the Sahara, there were also flip-flops between ice ages and moderate conditions, which happened every 1,000 years, before things settled down 10,000 years ago. The idea that global warming might destabilize many climate systems and give rise to abrupt transitions was explored in the movie The Day After Tomorrow, in which melting ice shelves caused a sudden reversal in Atlantic currents and a worldwide catastrophe. The idea of climate tipping points was explored more rigorously by a team of scientists led by myself for a study recently published in the journal PNAS. We looked at all the simulations performed by 37 climate models that have been used to inform the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, together with the historical and pre-industrial simulations. It gave us a gigantic amount of data, around 10 to the 15 times bytes divided over several computer servers around the world. We detected 37 cases of abrupt change distributed over 3 different climate change scenarios. These included the Arctic becoming ice-free even in winter, the Amazon rainforest dying off, and the total disappearance of snow and ice cover on the Tibetan Plateau, which, guess which one we're very close to? Really close to. There's a 30% chance that at least one of these tipping points will be crossed over the next 200 years. 30% chance, oh my God. This increases to 50% in the most aggressive warming scenario. However, the likelihood of crossing any individual tipping point is much lower. Only a few percentage points. But this is what I wanted to say. Let me go back to Ben C's tweet. What he said was 18 out of the 37 dangerous climate change tipping points featured in IPCC models will be reached before 2C. That would be half, right? This is to say that in the next 10 to 20 years, some have already been reached. 10 to 20 years? You think we're going to reach 2C in 20 years, or is it 10 years? What do you guys think? So he goes on to say, we find that the number of abrupt shifts identified in representative concentration pathway RCP 8.5 scenarios is significantly larger than in other scenarios of lower radiative forcing. RCP 8.5 remains consistent with announced government policies until 2050! Exclamation point. Is this, hold on one second. This is from March 8th, 2020. Worst case global warming scenario, still best guide until 2050. So that's the track we're on, right? A worst case scenario of surging greenhouse gas emissions in this century is still the most useful choice for government planning until 2050, despite criticisms that it is alarmist, a U.S. study said on Monday. Damn it, stop telling the truth. Dang, stop telling us that this is reality. Will you stop it? You alarmist, you crazy nutcase, you realist, you doomer. It remains consistent with announced government policies until 2050 and has highly plausible levels of CO2 emissions in 2100. RCP 8.5, worst case scenario, is very, very relevant. If it didn't exist, we'd have to create it. Again, the people who are telling the truth about this are described as alarmist, doomers, kooks, crazy people, people to be ignored, people to be derided. G. Demarest asks, will Biden save us? Certainly not. Absolutely not. He just said, I'm not for the Green New Deal. He just said, I'm not for the Green New Deal. I will not stop fracking. I will not stop subsidizing fossil fuel companies. No, he will not save us. So if you're trying to tell people, climate change is the reason to vote against Trump, I mean, whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do. If you want to say that Biden is slightly better than Trump and that's why you're voting for him for climate change, do what you got to do. Do what you got to do. I'm just going to tell you right now, nothing will fundamentally change. Why do I know this? Because that's what Biden said. Nothing will fundamentally change. And there you go. Creative experiments. USA was founded on uniting with slave owners against Britain. Today we can at least unite with some Proud Boys to fight Jeff Bezos. Okay, you think that Proud Boys are going to be fighting Jeff Bezos? I mean, I'm gonna take that as a joke. But the Proud Boys don't give two F's about Jeff Bezos or what he's doing. They don't care about Jeff Bezos or climate change or anything. So whatever. Uh, Sultan Bev, deride me, call me alarmist, whatever you like, but don't come for me, or don't come to me for food when the collapse comes. Right, Osama, that's not your Green Deal. Sorry, I just messed that up completely. My apologies. Irk 1, the only thing that will fundamentally change is the climate. Yeah. Yeah, Proud Boys are not anybody who's going to do anything about anything. Sorry to say. So I think there's a couple more things I want to cover today. This is from the Daily Poster, which is David Sirota's newsletter. This is from today. Fossil fuel companies profited off drilling, but have left states with $280 billion in cleanup costs. This is called an externality. Right? They made the profits. Somebody else had to pay to clean them up. Clean up the mess. Trump was asked to fund a program employing jobless oil and gas workers to do the cleanup, but instead he gave a $100 billion bailout to oil execs. Of course he did. Of course he did. Because that's a very Trumpian thing to do. And good tweet below it. Another example of the monolith that is corporate welfare. Which means that both Democrats and Republicans totally love corporate welfare. Not afraid of it, not against it. They're going to keep it going. Biden or Trump, they're going to keep it going. Let's look at this for just a little bit. This is from David Sirota's newsletter. This spring, states pitched the Trump administration on an innovative jobs proposal. Use federal stimulus funds to hire thousands of unemployed fossil fuel workers to plug oil and gas wells, leaking emissions that are intensifying the climate crisis. Instead, the Trump White House funneled nearly $100 billion in bailouts to oil and gas corporations through the Federal Reserve. I wonder which states and who. Who were the people that organized this? Because, it's fairly thoughtful. That move enriched fossil fuel industry executives and investors that have been among Trump's biggest boosters, but it has left a huge problem. State governments could now be on the hook for up to $250 billion to plug methane-leaking wells. Well, that's why they proposed it, right? Because now they got to pay for this. To plug methane-leaking wells that fossil fuel corporations have abandoned, according to a new report. The $280 billion price tag is the estimated cost of plugging onshore wells and remediating the surrounding land after they are no longer in operation, according to the study released today by Carbon Tracker, a think tank that documents the impact of the energy transition on capital markets. States from Colorado to Louisiana to Ohio are being warned that the cost of cleanup could be enormous. State governments cannot run deficits, so those costs would have to be paid either by raising taxes or slashing government programs. For a long time, those liabilities were far off in the future, study co-author Robert Schwark told the Daily Poster. The thinking was the industry is going strong. It's going to get bigger. As the world grows, we'll need more oil. So regulators and industry leaders agreed, let's just accept that we'll let these liabilities be settled by those companies' future cash flows. And we're comfortable enough that we're going to have that. Yes, let's just pass the buck off to the future. That's how we do it. The problem now, Schuwerk says, is that the oil and gas industry is in decline and oil companies aren't going to be able to afford the cost of remediation. Oopsie, can't pay for it. We're busted, guys. We can't pay for it. Somebody's going to have to pay for this. And my guess is that they're going to kick the can down the road as long as they can. Moreover, regulators and oil companies are severely underestimating the cost of cleaning up the wells. Of course they did. Whose corporations profited from industry and regulatory projections put the cost of cleanup at $30,000 per well, but Carbon Tracker has previously found that plugging many wells could cost closer to $300,000. So, whoops, we missed it by 10 times the amount. Whoops. Millions of wells must be plugged to combat climate change as part of the transition away from fossil fuels. 2.6 million documented onshore oil wells in the United States need to be plugged. 2.6 million. Because they leak methane and pollute groundwater. Of the more than 4 million onshore oil wells that have been drilled in the U.S. since 1900, only 1.6 million have been plugged, according to the report. So, yeah, there you go. Lots in California. A whole lot in Texas. New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming. Where else do we have? Pennsylvania, Ohio, Alaska. Climate scientists are only beginning to understand the extent of the methane leaks from those abandoned wells. According to EPA projections, abandoned oil and gas wells are improperly plugged wells emit enough methane each year to cause the climate damage equivalent of one day of U.S. oil consumption. It is possible that the abandoned wells emit 3 times that amount, according to the EPA, because the projections were based on incomplete data. Oil and gas companies are, by law, on the hook for these obligations. They are required to plug and abandon their wells once they are no longer in use. However, when companies file bankruptcy, this cleanup responsibility falls to creditors or state governments, even though fossil fuel companies had previously banked big profits off the wells. For many years, the oil industry has heavily discounted the costs of plugging wells, assuming most of those expenses will be incurred far into the future. And even for these lowball estimates, state governments have only required oil and gas companies to cover 1% of their liabilities through surety bonds. But the new Carbon Tracker report finds that these loose regulations and low estimates could cost taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. This is already happening. In Colorado, oil and gas company PetroShare Corporation filed for bankruptcy with nearly $16 million in cost liabilities for reclamation for its oil wells, but the state of Colorado had only required PetroShare to set aside $400,000 for reclamation costs. Good Lord. Last month, the state reached a settlement that allowed PetroShare's creditors to leave the orphaned wells to the state without paying the reclamation costs. In other words, taxpayers are on the hook for at least $16 million in cleanup costs since PetroShare declared bankruptcy. And how many times do you think that's going to be repeated in the next 20 years? 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. Hey guys, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and you can support the channel at the links below, PayPal, Patreon, Square. Also, if you'd like to watch the live streams, you can watch the live streams on my Patreon channel. You can subscribe for as little as $1. So hopefully I will see you over there, and thanks so much.